Zara is going to talk about her first year course in Rec and Leisure, in which she has an online course and she's using some of this material towards her on-campus course. And she's going to talk about the challenges that this technique had helped her with and with dealing with this group of students in first year. It's a large class, I assume. Yeah. So Zara, please.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I'm actually happy to chat about this and would be very interested in your ideas or experiences if you have them to share. This is my third time teaching this face-to-face class, and it's always a learning experience. So as Samara said, the course that I had is Rec 100, and it's a large first-year course. And I'm going to talk about how I took some elements from the online version of that course and integrated them into the face-to-face version. I'll give you a bit of an overview of the course in general, what I did when I developed the online version, and then what that looked like when I pulled pieces from online into face-to-face. To give you a sense of the class, it is an overview of Recreation and Leisure Studies. It's a required course for our first-year students in their first term. It's a large class, 350 students in one section, and it's a diverse group of students. So actually fewer than half of the students in the class are actually our first-year Rec and Leisure Studies students. The rest of them come from across campus and across years 1 to 4. One of the big pieces of the class, separate from the content, is the need to emphasize first-year skills. So we see our Rec 100 and our Rec 101 courses as a place where students become equipped with some of the skills needed to become successful university students. So we're balancing content with that secondary purpose of the course. So I taught the face-to-face version prior to developing the online version last year. And the reason that we developed the online version is it's one of our department's most important service courses. So we have a lot of students from across campus who take that class. And we found consistently, it's only offered once a year, that we had a lot more requests to get in than we could handle capacity-wise. So the online version was our way to hopefully continue offering that to more students as electives. Additionally, it's a good way for transfer students to get into the program through an earlier access point so that they can start taking the courses beyond Rec 100 instead of having to wait into the fall term. So that was our purpose in developing the course in general. When I developed the course, one of the mandates was to keep the course as close to the in-class version, the face-to-face version, as possible, because we would have some students who were coming into the program as transfer students, and the department wanted them to have as similar an experience as possible to those in-class students. So to this end, I had mostly the same assignment structure. A big part of the class is discussion as well, and classroom discussions and small think, pair, shares or small group discussions. So I included a discussion board element into the online version, and connecting student experience with course content was a big thing for us. And this is because we have so many elective students who take it. It probably will be the only Rec and Leisure Studies course that they take in their entire career. We have engineers and math students and computer science students. And so we want them to leave not thinking of it as a foundational course for the rest of their degree, but thinking about why is this relevant to me in my life. And so connecting student experience was important. You'll have to excuse this freeze frame of my face. I really did go through the video trying to find a better one, and this is as good as it got. So one of the things that we did in the online version was I would create every week a poll question, and the poll was optional. Students didn't have to do it. I had about a 50% response rate in the class of the online version. This one says, what activities or pursuits do you participate in or are aware of others participating in that could be defined as deviant or marginalized leisure? The students would respond, and then at the beginning of each week, I would post a video where I talked about some of the things that they said. So that was how we tried to connect those ideas. It was the lead-in to every week's discussion. And this is part of a new newish, I guess at this point, I'm not sure, Christine, how new it is anymore, but a newish model where online instructors can edit as they go throughout the term. So that was what I was doing there. So that's how we took the in-class version and tried to apply it to the online version. But then last year, Christine and Jane actually suggested that I consider using some of the online pieces that I had developed into the in-class version. And for me, there were a couple of reasons why I thought that this would make sense, and depending on the courses you teach, it might look a little bit different. First of all, I wanted to familiarize students with Learn functionalities. So particularly in a course where there are 350 students, a lot of my communication comes through Learn. I do news posts and I give assignment outlines and all of those kinds of things on Learn. But I find that a lot of first-year students don't go into Learn very often unless they have a reason to go in there because they're not familiar with the system. So building in some of the course pieces required them to go in and interact with the environment if they wanted to get that content and the associated marks, which I'll talk about. I think also blended and flipped and alternative ways of delivering classes are becoming more and more common, and so I liked the idea of having my first years exposed to a different way of taking in content in their first year class. Another piece that I thought was important was to provide the opportunity to self-manage their work timelines with some limits. So the online modules and associated assessments were open for around 7 to 10 days, and students could go in and do that whenever within that amount of time. And I found that was an effective way to, again, with those first year skills, get students thinking about how to manage their schedules and their time. But second of all, it also allowed me to ease the load that students had during peak times throughout the term. So the times that I embedded or pulled some of the online modules aligned with midterm time, end of term assignment time in a really big, diverse class where students have all different kinds of schedules and demands. It's hard to create an assignment schedule that works for everybody. So this was a way to say, for this week, you can manage how you do your work for this course. Maybe it makes sense to do it right away on Sunday night. Maybe you need to wait until Friday, and that's okay if you have other things going on. And in terms of feedback that I've gotten so far, anecdotally, I have heard, particularly from upper year students, that that was a useful piece of the online modules. So what they looked like were basically what they look like in the online world. So they were pulled. I have a slide about how that was done if anyone's interested in how that actually worked. It was relatively easy. I went over to CEL and they helped me, along with Christine. So they work through the module. Each module has its outcomes identified. They have readings and videos that they need to complete prior to moving through the module, and it's just cueing them for things that they will be watching or reading throughout the module. And so that's what the queue kind of looks like if I'm asking them to do something in between. Then they have their content, and at the end, I have reminders of what needs to happen next. So there were 5 modules. For 2 of the modules, they didn't come to class at all for the next day. They had a class off. For 3 of them, they came and we did activities around the content that they had taken in. And again, that was partly related to the strategic timing piece so that they would have a week where they were entirely able to manage their schedules. And you can see down there the queue to participate in the discussion board. So this is how I assessed these pieces, 2 ways. So the first way was through Top Hat questions in class. I used Top Hat this term in Rec 100 for the first time. Really enjoyed it, if anyone wants to talk about that. But what I did was I would ask a mix of content-related and then participation-related questions that built off of the module. So the module that I showed you, the disability module, a question that I asked was, which of the following is true about the social model of disability? And then I have 2 options, one is true, one isn't. And it's just a way for me to, first of all, check to make sure that everyone's understanding the key takeaways from the module. Also a way for them to earn participation marks. And then I would have other questions that weren't correct or incorrect, but just a way to start discussion. I found that using Top Hat was a good way to check in with everyone. In Rec 100, typically there are about 20 students who I hear from on a regular basis in large class discussions. So this was a way to hear everybody's voice without people necessarily speaking up. The way that the answers are set up reveal how many people said what or how many people responded to the question. So that helped give me a better sense of what was happening. And then the second piece was an online discussion board. So this was open while the module was open, and students had to go in and engage with a group of 9 other peers, so in groups of 10, with the questions that I'd asked. So again, with the disability module, they had to watch a TED Talk by a woman named Stella Young called "I'm Not Your Inspiration, Thank You Very Much." And so they had to answer some questions around, did this video challenge your understandings of disability? How or why not? Do you think that educated, engaging people like Stella Young with disabilities have an obligation to serve as inspirations or advocates? Why or why not? And so they would go in and discuss those things. I had TAs who monitored these discussion boards, and student contributions were rated on a scale of 1 to 4. They were given a rubric. To achieve a 4 out of 4, they needed to respond to at least one of the prompts. Usually I had more than one prompt, so they could find whatever piece was interesting to get the ball rolling, and also engage in a conversation with someone else. So it wasn't enough just to post and then disappear. And if they had sufficient depth or engagement, then that's what they needed to get a 4. And that's how it was evaluated. So the online discussion boards were worth 2% each, and the Top Hat questions in total for the whole term were worth 15%, but that also included non-online module related days. We used it most days in class for participation. So that is what using online components in my face-to-face class looks like. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Did you say your Top Hat was worth 15%?
Can I
Yes.
just give you the...
Yeah, 15.
Can you please repeat the question?
It was really just a comment that I thought 15% for Top Hat was quite high.
Yeah, Top Hat recommended between 10 and 20. Previously, I had a written component that was worth 15% for participation, and Top Hat was basically a way to ease the written piece. And I found the added benefit of it was to use as an on-the-fly discussion point instead of collecting participation responses later and looking through them and bringing them back to class. It was something that I could respond to right away. Yeah.
I have a question about what you do with the students when they're in class. So they did most of the work online and then they come to class. What types of activities?
So for 2 of them, they didn't come, but for 3 of them, they did come. And for example, the lecture on disability was one of those days where they did come to class. So then on that day, we would have activities structured using something like Top Hat. I would ask some questions, and then they would break away into small groups to talk about those things. I would ask the groups to share their ideas. In that class, I also use an idea, I think it's from the CTE blog maybe, Shannon Day, who's a faculty member, wrote about a mitten ball debate. So I use a beach ball. We have a beach ball debate in the classroom where they have to bounce the ball back and forth, side to side. So we take up issues related to that. And the in-class piece is really related to making those links to their lives versus more content delivery. It's about thinking about how do we navigate issues of disability in our everyday lives? How did this module challenge our ideas? In the leisure field, what are some solutions that we can think of for people with disabilities? In your own fields as an engineer or a math student or a geography student, why are these issues important for you to think about? And so I use a variety of large group discussion and group management tools to get at those different ideas.
Okay, thank you.
Given that there's a time cost for setting things up in terms of online, would you have chosen to do something similar if you didn't already have the stuff from the online course?
Probably not. I probably wouldn't have even thought of it, to be honest. it was really, really easy to get the content in because it had already been developed. I think similarly, I'm not sure that I would do it if I hadn't developed the online version, because part of the course mandate when I developed the online version was to keep them pretty aligned. I felt really comfortable that it would make sense and I could find a way to integrate them hopefully seamlessly or pretty seamlessly. I think if I thought, will I build 5 modules in to learn for this, it probably would have been a deterrent. But I teach every term, so I'm not sure where I would find the time to do that. It is something to think about. In full disclosure, I don't know that I would do it, though.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm just curious, you taught the regular version of the course, right? And you taught this version of the course. Was there a real difference between the two?
Yeah, I was actually thinking as I made this presentation that it'll be nice to see my course evaluations to think through what happened. I specifically asked them to comment if they had thoughts on the blended piece. So in a more concrete way, I hope to know more soon in January, I guess. In terms of the difference it made in class, I found that the discussion boards, I'm probably going to have to rethink a little bit to prevent just sort of information dumping without really connecting to it in a real way. So I did learn that I'm not sure how happy I am with how that ultimately went. But what I was really happy with were the meetings in class after they had gone through the modules. I found that I heard from a lot more students who I didn't normally hear from. We found ways to make things come alive a little bit more beyond just taking in content. So for me as an instructor, that felt really successful, and for me as an instructor, the discussion boards need some work. I struggle with discussion boards any time that I use them. If any of you have ideas about discussion boards, I'd be interested. But in terms of the student experience, it's hard to say. Anecdotally, as I said, I did have some upper year students comment that they liked having the flexibility around those modules, particularly my STEM field students who have my understanding is a pretty concrete schedule and a pretty heavy schedule at certain points of the year. So I don't know is the short answer to that. There were, for me, pros and cons, and we'll see when the evaluations come through. You're welcome.
I was thinking about the 2% piece and wondered if your TAs were giving any pushback about the amount of work that took to monitor it.
Well, my TAs were wonderful, and so they didn't, but part of my concern with it was that piece, that the TAs did a lot of work. They ended up getting a pretty good system where they got class lists and they would just read through the discussions and note people's contributions and rate them at the time. So they checked in during their office hours to hopefully overlap the time spent. But I'm not sure that it was the best use of their time, which is part of the concern. And I also don't know that students made all of the most meaningful connections. My intent in doing it was to try and get the ball rolling for when we met in class, and also for them to be thinking for the days that we didn't meet in class about the topic. I just don't know if that was achieved, and it was a lot of work for the TAs for something that maybe wasn't the best solution. Yeah. I think the TAs probably hated me in their hearts, but they didn't say it out loud.
I have a question about the group formation. So you said that they had some group work?
Yes.
How did you form the groups?
The discussion groups were formed automatically when they enrolled.
Oh, okay.
So that was just set up in Learn. And then the in-class groups were usually just set up with who they were sitting with. And that was for teaching and discussion, not for evaluation.
Oh, okay. So question here? Yeah.
So I'm curious about the comparisons between when you taught it without the blended, say a year ago, and now with the blended. Are you, for example, asking the same questions on the final exam to see if there was a increase or decrease in their understanding of the material? And I guess you have the unique opportunity to be able to compare your online version versus the in-class version. And do you have any real concrete observations about how much they're actually learning? And one other thing while I have the mic, how many of the students do you think did not do the readings before they came to class, for example? That's always one of my big questions when we discuss this kind of blended learning stuff.
Yeah, so, sorry, before they came to class for the work days where we work through ideas, and part of what I have in that class are readings quizzes built in to learn to hopefully encourage students to do the readings. I would guess that a lot of them still didn't. I had a conversation with a student who said that she could do the quizzes without reading all of the pieces, because I don't ask things like, on what page did this thing happen? So it's relatively easy if you're a good reader to think about, oh, what's the definition of this? Go to it, open the book, there it is, pick the right question. So probably not everyone did. I do find that my first year rec students do the readings. Part of the readings quizzes are for their benefit, to encourage them to recognize that doing the readings and coming prepared is important. I also teach the required second year class the next year, and I find that their reading is pretty good. So I think it works for the people it's supposed to work for. For those who it isn't built specifically for, I'm not sure what the uptake is on that. I think it's probably mixed. I think that has to do with the reason that people are in the class also, so what they're really trying to get out of it and what they think of when they think of Rec 100, and taking that as their one elective in their whole degree. In terms of your first question, I forget it now.
Comparison of how much they actually learned, say for example, online in class and then in class versus blended in class.
Right. Well, we're actually, so we did keep the final exam relatively the same. I make a few changes based on different guest lecturers that we have coming in, but it's mostly the same. So I'll be interested to see, because it is a long answer written exam that asks them to connect course content to questions that I'm asking them. So I'm hoping to see some deeper connections from some students. I always love in papers or assignments where students will say, like in that activity we did in class, blah, 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 blah happened, because I'm thinking that something stuck with them a little bit more. So similar to the other question, I don't know yet, but it is set up to hopefully be able to do a little bit of comparison.